we'll move on to item 7, which is our study session.
Item 7A, conduct a study session to review the city manager's proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 operating and capital improvement CIP budget.
The city manager, and then of course I bet you we're going to see the finance director after.
You got it. Let us work out our technical kinks.
He said that this next presentation is only about 10 slides.
This presentation is 74 slides. We will go as expeditiously as possible, recognizing that it's 9:30, but we do want to do the appropriate articulation for council and the public. As we get that up, the full budget slide deck is, I don't know, it's 297 now, and you can thank your lovely finance department for that. So we're ready. So Javon Grogan, city manager, and Keith DeMartini, our finance director, will take the podium shortly. So I want to first off begin by thanking all of the staff that had a lot of work in putting together this proposed budget. It was truly a team effort with rounds and rounds of revisions, and unfortunately, given our fiscal context, further reductions being proposed. And so, while it is called the city manager's proposed budget, we do nothing alone, and it's truly a team effort. So, thank you, team. Okay, so tonight's agenda, we will review at a very, very high level the process to develop the budget. We'll talk about the fiscal context that we find ourselves in. We will then go through the proposed general fund budget and deficit reduction strategies for the general fund. We will then have a high-level fiscal condition summary and general fund detail by our finance director. We will then go through general fund financial summary, general fund revenues, and then revenue enhancement strategies, and then that will close out tonight. You do not see a detailed presentation on expenditures there because that is for our all-day budget retreat with the City Council tomorrow. Our objectives tonight, we have 3. I'm going to start from the bottom, and it's ask questions. Yes, this is a presentation, but City Council, this is your budget deliberations, and the budget is the key to the city. And we want to make sure that we provide you as many answers that we can tonight and throughout the rest of our budget process. So we do have staff that are paying attention to the questions being asked, and we will answer those that we can. We really want to discuss the proposed strategies, give a high level tonight and further detail later when we have our department presentations. We will discuss the pressures facing the general fund, and we will sort of give a summary of both operating and capital. So budget development process, why don't we begin there? So our mission as an organization, the City of San Bruno exists to provide exemplary services for the community that will enhance the quality of life. Our vision for our future is to be the peninsula city of choice in order to live, in which to live, learn, work, shop, and play. Our values are listed there, but integrity is number 1, teamwork, exemplary service to the community, friendliness, and commitment. City Council priority focus areas, they're there. They are not listed in priority area. The City Council has had a number of meetings this year to talk about priority focus areas and strategic initiatives. We have another one coming up on June 4th. But the current City Council priority focus areas, and at your last meeting, you did confirm that these would be your priority focus areas for 2020-2021 fiscal year, but that will be finalized again on June 4th. But it's implement the vision for the transit corridor and revitalize downtown and our commercial corridor, assure rehabilitation and replacement of critical community facilities and infrastructure, grow our revenues, continue to strengthen community connections, protect and improve the aesthetics and safety of the community, proactively plan for our future, and last but not least, organizational health and employee success. Just a quick highlight, each year the city manager delivers a proposed budget to the city council. There's a robust set of meetings. The city council does have to adopt a balanced budget, and even though we have a deficit this year, there are a number of budget balancing strategies that are proposed before you. As you know, you receive quarterly and mid-year updates, and we had a number of those. We had all of those this year with a number of challenges before us. So initial instructions that I provided to our staff pre-COVID-19, but this would not be an enhancement budget. And any, frankly, enhancements really needed to align to a city council priority focused area. Zero base for contractual services, tools, equipment, dues. Frankly, anything that we could keep or zero at a zero increase, we strove to, knowing that there are some contracts and increases that are outside of our immediate control. And we strived to maintain general fund reserves at the policy limit, albeit knowing that the reality of our financial context is that we have reduced available cash in our general fund reserve due to the loan to the city net department. This is a quick recap on very high level of the budget process that we've undertaken. January 21st is when those instructions were provided to department that really set out the initial population of the budget, and then went through a series of reviews and internal meetings. And again, once we put the budget together, there was need for further reductions, COVID-19 and otherwise, and so those are reflected in what is before you today. The City Council will remember you had your annual retreat on February 22nd, where you really had an in-depth presentation from the departments and everything that they were working on, and got sort of a underneath the hood view of the departments. And so that will happen again tomorrow when we have all the departments present for a presentation. April 21st, we had a study session on strategic initiatives and goals. On April 24th, the draft budget was due to the city manager and finance director, and another meeting on May 8th, and then the recommended proposed budget was provided to you on May 21st. But here's where we are now. A ton of work has led up to where we are right now, and we are really launching the City Council budget deliberation process. And so before you on the screen are a list of 6 meetings, beginning tonight with our study session and the presentation of the proposed budget. Tomorrow, we will have an all-day budget retreat that will be like this setting, less than ideal, and will be virtual. And so it will be a challenge to have the type of robust engagement that we normally have when we go through the budget and have everybody in one room. But that meeting will begin at 10 a.m. It will be on Zoom and is a public meeting for everyone to see, as is all of these meetings. And so we anticipate, and the schedule has us going tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Next, on June 4th, we will have that City Council Strategic Initiative Retreat where we will talk about your referrals and injects to the budget. On June 9th, we will have our first budget hearing, another study session where we will respond to any questions that we are not able to respond to today or tomorrow, and that meeting will begin at 7 p.m. We then will have a capital budget day, and that is on June 11th, where we will delve deep into the capital improvement budget. Capital improvement budget, it's all of our projects, not just general fund projects, but sewer projects, water projects, stormwater projects. We will talk not only about the current projects that are underway, their status. We will also talk about the projects that are recommended for funding, as well as the unmet needs that we do not have the capacity to fund. And then all of this marches to June 23rd, where the City Council will adopt a balanced budget, and that meeting begins at 7 p.m. So for the public, those are the dates. Please attend and participate in your democracy. Fiscal context. So everything is different. We all know that. COVID-19 has changed just about everything about our society. We had just over the weekend, Hertz filed for bankruptcy. We know JCPenney's filed for bankruptcy. We know that we have airport adjacent businesses that are struggling, as well as all of our other businesses that are struggling with the shelter in place. What we also know is that the effects of COVID-19 at this point are projected to last anywhere between 12 to 18 months and potentially longer. But tonight is really about talking and presenting the information of how that impacts us here. What is the impact that we are projecting to feel in our proposed budget for 2021? So a couple sort of foundational slides that I will go through, beginning with population and city staffing. The real point of this graph, and council has seen various versions of this, but the real point is to note the black line, which is there was a significant decrease in city staff during the Great Recession, and we are still not up to where we were, even though there has been moderate population growth or growth between 1999 to 2020 of 12.2%. And so this graph shows two different pieces of data. High level, there has been growth of 12% over the last 20 years in our city, but the city staffing level is actually not back to its height in 2003, and so that impacts everything we do. That impacts our ability to serve the community, but it is part of our reality. We have a number of principal employers. These will look very familiar. I will not spend the time to go through them all, but we should all note JCPenney's is up there, and we'll talk about that right now. So on the right-hand panel, you have the top 25 sales tax generators in the city of San Bruno in alphabetical order, not in order of their receipts. Highlighted in red, though, you have three that, two of which we know are now out of business, and one recently filed for bankruptcy, and we do not have information on when and if they will reopen in Tan Fran. And so that's part of our fiscal context. It's three of our top 25 sales tax generators in the city, two of which close. One we know has tough times. And this does not show Sky Park, which didn't provide sales tax, but it did provide a parking tax. And so that's part of our fiscal context. The changing economy is having an impact on our sales tax. And we all know that during mid-years, we projected the closure of Sears, and that had an immediate impact to our current year 1920 budget and our 2021 budget. That has been incorporated. In addition, due to COVID-19, we are projecting a 18% reduction in sales tax for this coming budget year, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that has a significant, approximately a $1.4 million impact on our revenue generation for next fiscal year. So what is our projected deficit? So our deficit represents 15% of expenditures, which is a significant, our expenditure base is $49 million, and our projected deficit is $8.2 million this year. That reflects a number of things. It unfortunately reflects a 40% drop in our hotel tax, also called the TOT, the Transient Occupancy Tax. We all know the impact on hotels being virtually empty during the beginning part of the shelter in place. But we are projecting a 40% drop over the 12-month period for 2021. What I'll tell the council and the community is that is in line with other cities in San Mateo County and what is being projected. Some cities are projecting as high of a 66% drop. The unique makeup of our hotels is slightly different than our neighboring cities, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. but our best projection is a 40% drop. Again, a 18% drop in sales tax, a 28% drop in our Measure G district sales tax. And you may be asking why. Why is the district sales tax dropping more than the regular sales tax? And that's because it's a district sales tax, and it actually applies to transactions differently. The regular sales tax is based on every transaction that is sales tax eligible pays the base sales tax rate, but only certain transactions pay the district sales tax. For example, if you buy a car and that car is going to be registered in San Bruno, you pay our district tax. But if you buy that car, even if you buy that car in San Bruno, but your place of residence where you register that car will be outside of San Bruno, you do not pay that district tax. It's actually a use and transactions tax, and there's a whole section of government code that explains what it applies to and what it doesn't. But at a top line summary, it acts differently. But we are projecting $2.9 million from that revenue source, where we had been projecting more than $4 million pre-COVID. Our recreation services revenues dropped 52%. Now that comes when you look at the totality of the budget with a drop in expenditures, because we will not be running a number of recreation programs, and a 28% drop in our senior programs. The revenue from senior programs, again, that comes with an associated drop in expenditures. And what the council and the public may remember is early during the recession, we unfortunately had to furlough approximately 66 part-time employees due to the cancellation of those programs. Recreation, library, senior programs throughout the community. Now, we will have, through tonight's presentation and tomorrow's workshop, a significant conversation about every fund that makes up our fiscal condition and our financial accounting system. But I did, in the beginning, want to provide the City Council and the community with a highlight for what is the condition of our funds. And so our general fund, it's projected to have a significant deficit of 15%. And significant progress is needed to obtain fiscal sustainability. The good news is that we started that project, but part of our $8.2 million deficit is COVID-19, roughly $4 million, but roughly half is increase in other expenditures, largely personnel costs and contracts. And so we have a fiscal sustainability challenge here, and that is reflected in that $8.2 million shortfall. Stormwater, we talked a little bit about that in the presentation by the Lou Edwards Group and Godby Research. Our stormwater fund has challenges. It is projected to go negative in 2021, and the current parcel charges to fund the city's stormwater system does not cover all of the cost. And there are a number of regulatory trash capture devices and diversion of trash to the stormwater programs that we have to implement, and that is going to require subsidy to the general fund or additional parcel fees. And in addition, we have capital improvement projects that we do not have the ability to fund out of the stormwater fund. One of them is on Spyglass, where we have a pinch point in our stormwater network, and we've had prior flooding, and that project is being designed, and the estimated cost of that project is $1.5 million, and we do not have sufficient funds in that stormwater fund to cover that, and so we will be looking toward other general funds or sources to fund that. But it's a needed improvement. We have a number of replacement funds, be there for vehicles, equipment, technology. There are an insufficient amount of annual set-asides, which means that we do not always have the full amount set aside when that vehicle or that equipment needs to be replaced, and so a subsidy is required, either pulling money out of that fund, additional money that was allocated for other equipment or vehicles, or it requires a subsidy from the general fund. And so we need healthier replacement funds. Our insurance reserve fund, we will talk about in significant detail tomorrow. That fund is projected to have a ending balance of $500,000, and that is our fund for workers' comp, our workers' compensation claims, our self-insurance claims, and one other that unfortunately I'm blanking on right now. But just a high-level summary for those that are only going to see this presentation: an ending fund balance of $500,000. When for workers' comp claims we're self-insured for the first $750,000 is not sufficient. And so in that fund, ideally we would have enough at a minimum to cover the self-insured retention of all of our self-insurance funds, and that is not currently the case. Facilities and Building Reserve Fund, there is approximately $5 million in that fund, and we know that our needed facility improvements today far exceed that. If we only look to Fire Station 52, that has an estimated replacement cost of $10 million, you can see that we do not have enough accumulated in that fund, and that there are significant improvements needed to that building, as well as a number of our other facilities. CityNet, we've talked a lot about that, and we will continue to talk a lot about that. Even though we've made substantial progress this year to essentially stop digging the hole in the annual operating budget, there is still a projected hole in 1920 that is proposed to be rectified in 2021, but the longer-term success of that enterprise really hinges on the fiber to the home project and a $14 million investment. A $13 million investment for that project on top of the $14 million that enterprise owes the general fund in a loan. Our general fund reserve balances, while they meet the policy target, they do not have available cash to meet the policy target because of the fiber to the home loan, and so our reserve funds are challenged. We've talked a lot about that. We'll have a number of slides on that. And it does pose a challenge in times like this, where we would ordinarily be relying heavily on our reserve funds. And as some of you may be hearing the strategies that other cities are implementing to resolve their shortfall, they're really looking towards their reserve funds because they have those rainy day funds. Unfortunately, we have limited available cash due to the CityNet Services loan. Couple of bright sides in our financial condition are the water fund and the wastewater fund. Those are stable and sustainable, largely because this city council took the action to adopt the 5-year rate increases due to the deferred maintenance of our water and sewer infrastructure, and we have seen those projects all across the community, and we talked about those at a prior meeting. And then Measure G, the voter-approved measure, is an amazing revenue source in perpetuity to provide needed improvements to roads, maintain essential services like police, fire, and as well as youth programs, and maintain parks. As I mentioned, the projected amount for 2020-2021 is $2.9 million due to COVID-19, but a revenue source in perpetuity that will help with some of these challenges, but not all. I mentioned that because just our road deficit alone, we need to be spending about $6 million a year to get our PCI, our pavement condition index, up to where it needs to be. And so even if we were to use all of the $4 billion on a regular year that Measure G is projected to bring in, we would still be $2 million short. And that's just sort of a way to think about the magnitude of our road challenge and some of our other needs. And so I know that this paints a fairly significant portrait of the challenges that are before us. I want to provide a couple other context slides for this. This slide provides a comparison of our general fund revenue to a few other cities in the county. And there's a lot of data here, but the main point on this slide is every city is unique, and we how this economic recession is affecting us is different than it's going to affect Burlingame, for example, because one of the things we see on this slide is Burlingame has a larger share of their general fund revenue, just about 40% on transient occupancy tax. Ours is significantly less. And other cities have a higher share of property tax. Ours is significantly less. And so I wanted to show this just because people in the community may be seeing how other cities are addressing their fiscal challenge, but you really have to take a deeper look and see what is their revenue base and how is the reduction having an impact on their general fund. Next slide shows per capita. Important point here is that on a per capita basis, San Bruno brings in less revenue, significantly less, compared to a number of our peer cities in the county. In this presentation, the lowest, only second to Daly City. And so that's part of our fiscal context, that's part of our reality, that per capita revenue generation in San Bruno is less than our peer cities in the county. So there are no easy decisions before the City Council. It was not a joyous thing to put together the proposed budget that is before you, and the task that you have is a challenging one, and know that I and the entire executive team recognizes that. And so there are difficult decisions to resolve our fiscal challenge this year. Defunding a lot of capital improvement projects where we have had money to set aside for capital improvement projects due to our fiscal condition. The proposed strategies has reducing that by $1.9 million. That's on top of the defunding of capital projects that we had to undertake during the mid-year. There are a number of service level reductions that we'll talk about. There's a limited use of our reserves because of the limited available cash in our reserves, and again, we'll talk in detail about that. We're reducing set-asides for equipment replacements. Again, remember I said that we actually need to increase our set-asides for equipment replacement. Unfortunately, our financial context has us reducing those set-asides. We are freezing 13 vacant positions, police officers, firefighters, and a number of non-sworn staff, administrative and operating positions that will have an impact on operations. The city of San Bruno has not recovered from a staffing perspective since the Great Recession, and not having a position has a significant impact on services, and we'll talk about those. There is one personnel reduction of a field position, a senior code enforcement officer in this proposed budget. We are also recommending the use of Measure G to delay and delaying some road improvements, really to avoid future service and personnel reductions, really due to the significant fiscal context we find ourselves in this year, with $4 million of that deficit being generated by COVID-19. And then we are postponing progress on needed enhancements and unmet needs. So what are we doing about it? So the good news is that we launched the Fiscal Sustainability Project as the council and members in the community that have been paying attention to some of these presentations, and we've taken a number of steps. Last year, a lot of work around Measure G, but also other revenue expenditure controls, and a number of changes to renegotiate contracts. We've talked about those and all the wonderful work that the CityNet department did to renegotiate significant contracts, a number of the internal controls and cost-saving measures that were led by our finance director that we've talked about in our prior presentations. Again, I don't want to go through all of that, but this is important to note that we are not beginning the road to fiscal sustainability. We've already been on this road. COVID-19 means that we need to amend it. This is a living, breathing project, and we are honestly amending it on the fly due to COVID-19 and the new challenge that is before us. So the next thing, fiscal sustainability. A core component is growing our revenue base. That should not be confused with increased taxes, or should not be looked at as growing the city's revenue base means that we are only looking toward increasing taxes and fees. Economic development is critical, as we all know, and one of the core city council priority focus areas is implementation of the transit corridors plan and economic development, and that equals growing our revenue base. And I think we've all said a number of times we really have to grow ourselves out of this problem. We unfortunately can't just cut ourselves out of this problem or tax our way out of this problem. We have to grow our way out of this problem. And the good news is that we have significant development potential. And so the Community and Economic Development Director, Darcy Smith, tomorrow will go through some of these projects in detail. But I wanted to provide a few of them on the screen here, just so the City Council and the community can see that there are a number of projects in the development pipeline. Some have been approved and are under construction. For example, the Skyline Residential Project, 30 single-family homes and 40 multifamily teacher housing units, or Skyline College faculty housing units. Glenview Terrace is in the entitlement process. Mills Park will be before you. We just had a community meeting. I think it's all a blur, but about a week and a half ago, and staff is working to bring that before you in June of this calendar year, so just next month. We have 111 San Bruno that is going through the construction permit process. We have the Bay Hill specific plan and YouTube's request for an additional 2 million square feet of office space, a significant project that has been going forward, and we are scheduling a study session to talk about that community benefit package. And then we have Tan Fran and Sears that has been undergoing a significant effort to look at revitalization, and we know that Sears closed, but we have been in communications with Seritage, the company that manages. It's a REIT, real estate investment trust, that manages that property, and they will be coming forward with a reuse plan. And lastly on this slide, we have 1000 San Mateo Avenue that was just before the City Council a few meetings ago, wanting to place a measure on the November ballot to increase the height above the 3 stories that is limited under Ordinance 1284 for a potential large reuse of that property. Next, I wanted to talk about economic development on our border. And so there was an article in the San Mateo Daily Journal today about a project just on our border. And that project is located in Millbrae, that is the El Rancho Inn. And there is currently a apartment building, 384 units that is proposed with a hotel. In addition, there are a number of projects in South San Francisco that are projected that are going through various stages of the development pipeline. There's the South Line project for over 2.5 million square feet of office space. There is the project at 410 Norr Avenue, just behind Lowe's. It's the old Century Theater site that is projected to be a 3 to 5 story mixed-use complex with 342 residential units. And so we know development is around us and is occurring, and we have opportunities, and our neighboring municipalities are looking to develop sites along our border as well. So let's talk about the proposed general fund budget and the deficit reduction strategies. All in, we are a $180 million organization on an annual basis. That is all funds, sewer, water, general fund. Our general fund budget, as I mentioned, is $49 million. We have 265 FTEs and active and proposed capital projects, 102. Budget challenges that are before us. Some of these we've touched on, but of course COVID-19, a significant backlog of deferred maintenance projects, rising personnel costs, health insurance, pension costs. We'll talk about that today. We have our collective bargaining groups expiring. All of our bargaining groups contracts will expire at the end of this year. So December 31st, 2020. In addition, we have 2 contracts that have expired, and we are negotiating those. We have our CityNet department, stormwater, needed personnel investment, IT infrastructure, pressures on the general fund. So revenues are $45.2 million, expenditures 53.4. That accounts for the $8.2 million general fund deficit. Let's step through these. Again, I went over these in a prior slide, but these are the revenue drops. I won't talk about them again. We have $4 billion in personnel cost and operating cost increases. We have that accounts for that part of that $8.2 million. A important statistic for the council to know is 75% of our general fund budget goes to personnel. We are an organization of people that provide services, and that statistic is typical for municipal agencies like ourselves. And built into this 2021 budget is $900,000 of increased CalPERS pension cost that is spread out over the biweekly payroll, and we will have a number of charts and graphs on that. Increased health benefit cost, and only minor increases in supplies or contracts, frankly, that were absolutely necessary. And in some of our subsequent round of analysis, we reduced a number of line items within the budget. So what are the strategies that are before you, because we need to adopt a balanced budget? They're listed here. The council has options. There is a total of $9.1 million of strategies that are being put before you. I will step through them right now at a high level and then go in moderate detail with subsequent detail tomorrow. CIP defunding various projects or finding an alternative source so that project can still occur, or a scope change in the project. There are a number of in and outs for those, but those total just under $1.6 million. Delaying filling 13 vacant positions, that is 1.7, almost 1.8 million. A personnel reduction of a field position, a senior code enforcement officer, of 158,000. Various expenditure reductions totaling 107,000. Eliminate equipment annual allocation of 340,000. A transfer from into the general fund from other funds of 400,000. We'll talk about that. Again, use of Measure G to avoid further cuts to our public safety departments, police, fire, and park maintenance. General fund reserve using just under 600,000, fund balance 500,000, and various personnel cost reductions that are the subject of bargaining totaling $1.7 million. So your staff here examined a number of strategies to come up with this list. We wanted to provide you a high-level view of those on this slide 31. I will not go through all of these because many of these actually made it into the strategies that are before you tonight. And so why don't we talk at a high level about what these strategies are. So a $200,000 reduction in our street light pole replacement program. So the items that are before you are the $1.569 million reductions to capital improvement projects. And so I just want to really step through these at a high level to give you a sense of the decisions that unfortunately are before us. And so it's reducing our street light pole replacement program by $200,000. Council will remember that there was an inventory done of our street poles, and a number of them are still needed for replacement, and we are reducing the general fund allocation by $200,000 and identifying another funding source for that. We are identifying another funding source for some ergonomic improvements at the police dispatch center and in our record center. Those total $72,000. These are proposed to be used with equitable transfer funds, also called asset forfeiture. We are proposing to defund the senior center parking lot improvements and research alternative funding sources. That is $92,000. We hope to utilize funds within the senior center bequest fund. So currently there is a balance of $750,000 in the Senior Center Bequest Fund. And so we will be bringing that project back at a later date with a recommendation to use the bequest funds, and we want to take that to the Senior Advisory Board that is not meeting at this time. But that is a very needed improvement that we had planned to fund with general fund resources that now we are looking to use those bequest funds. And for the community, those bequest funds are donated to the San Bruno Senior Center by users of the Senior Center that include the Senior Center in their will. And so the total in that fund right now is $750,000. And we were actually just notified by a trustee of another donation. And so it's a normal process that the city goes through in working with the Senior Center and the families that represent the will or the trustee. We are defunding a Crestmore Slope stability project. As we all know, that there was a slide along San Bruno Avenue that needed to be fixed immediately. There was already a funded capital improvement project, and so these funds can be removed from that capital improvement project and put back into the capital reserve fund. We are recommending that they go to support the general fund operating. Reducing the scope of the Florida Avenue Park project by $900,000. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but the plan there is to seek grant funding for that project, but also leaving sufficient funds in that project to fund the $45,000 to finalize the plan. So we do have shovel-ready plans that we can use in our grant submittals, and also having the funds necessary to install irrigation, seed the park, and return it to the community as a open grass area. The work done by city staff and looking to do that and complete that this summer. And delaying $29,000 for stormwater trash capture devices. However, we do have $50,000 left in carry forward. Personnel impacts. So these total over $1.9 million. I will step through them at a high level. You will have city council before you, the police chief, the fire chief, and all of the department heads tomorrow to give you an in-depth presentation on the impacts of all of these reductions in their department. But at a high level, there is 7 vacant positions in the police department that we are recommending that they are froze for the 2021 fiscal year. I won't go through the cost of all of them, but for example, the 4 police officer vacancies account for $600,000 of savings. The community service officer, $97,000. The dispatcher, $125,000, and the police record clerk, $105,000. There are significant implications for the freezing the vacant police positions. It will mean that we will have to pull officers from other assignments and assign them to patrol. 2 examples of that is our 1 motor officer will go back to patrol, and that will leave us with a motor unit that has 0 officers due to our staffing. That it is common in a city of our size to have 4 motor officers. We currently have 1 field position, but with freezing these vacant officer positions, there is a sort of scale down effect in order to meet minimum staffings. It also means that we will adjust how we serve Tan Fran Mall, and the officers that are assigned to Tan Fran will also be responsible for patrol duties as well. Freezing 2 vacant firefighter positions, that accounts for a little over $350,000 to freeze those vacant firefighter positions. We will be able to meet minimum staffings, but as is the case today, without those positions, there is a challenge to meet, accommodate requests for sick time, injuries, and we essentially have to use overtime because we do not have those positions, and so they're currently vacant. There will be staffing implications by holding them vacant, and we have within the budget maintained the overtime budget to account for that, but we do think that it is a viable budget reduction strategy to reduce that staffing. Our Public Works Department, one civil engineer position, a savings of $155,000. A community economic development, 2 positions. Council will recall that these 2 positions were recommended for funding last fiscal year. Unfortunately, due to budget and financial challenges, they were not budgeted for the full year, but budgeted to come online in January of 2020. They were not filled when COVID-19 came upon us, and so we are recommending that those 2 positions be held vacant. It's a total of just under a $237,000 for both of those positions. City net, not general fund, but holding a vacant technician position of $117,000, and the reduction of 1 senior code enforcement officer of $158,000. Council will remember that we recently increased staffing in that unit from 2 code enforcement officers to 3 code enforcement officers, and this will be returning to that prior staffing level. A number of changes in the police department for reducing operating expenses. This is reducing backgrounds because we're holding those positions vacant, breach kits, emergency equipment, uniforms for our SWAT personnel because they purchased uniforms last year, and so we will not need that minor allocation, but it's a total budgetary savings of $80,000. In the fire department, another reduction of $27,000, reducing communications that we are looking to fund with asset forfeiture. A good note of reducing fuel and oil line item because we have 2 new trucks and they are actually proving to be what the manufacturer said because they have a idle mitigation system and they're burning less fuel and oil, and because they run so much, we're actually seeing that in our budget and can bring down that line item by a few $1,000s. Next up is a category that amounts to just under $3 million of projected strategies. And these are what we call fund transfers. So it's transferring money that was in the general fund or was budgeted to be expended from the general fund to another fund. The first item is, again, in the police department, $200,000 to use equitable sharing funds, also again called asset forfeiture, to fund the police officer position that is assigned to the DEA Airport Task Force. That position does really important work, working in collaboration with not just the airport, but other regional agencies. And we do receive asset forfeiture funds from that. We currently have a balance of just under $1 million in that account, and we are projecting to use those funds for a number of items in this budget, $200,000 for this item. Increase money for cops, about $100,000 for a cops grant to be used to offset general fund costs, transferring gas tax that can be used for operating expenditures in the streets program by $100,000. Again, the use of Measure G, $2 million of the $2.9 million that we are projecting to receive this year, and utilizing just under $600,000 of our reserve. There's also a number of changes that I think the council and the community should be very aware of. So the proposed budget that you have before you also includes a number of changes to our community services programs. One is aquatics as a initial cost saving measure, not brought on by a subsequent review, but one thing that we built into the budget due to COVID-19 is not returning our aquatics program in this budget year, 2021. Now, beginning in January, our pool was scheduled to go offline due to the construction of the new Aquatic and Rec Center, and due to COVID-19, it's unclear when the aquatics program would be able to restart, and that has a built-in savings of $120,000. We know that a number of people in the community use the pool, and we're looking for at least some use before it closed for the season, but unfortunately, due to financial challenges, that is not included in the budget. After-school programs are not included in the budget, and the subsidy for that program. The San Bruno Park School District has decided to enter into a contract with the YMCA that will provide after-school programs, and so we are in the process of transitioning that program fully over to the YMCA. Reduce recreation and senior activities and all large events such as Community Day due to the implications of COVID-19 in this budget. There will be no new police or other vehicle requests, and multiple operating reductions to balance the budget are already built into the budget, not reflected in the strategies that are before you, and a number of operating changes where we have the building and custodial division moving to Public Works, code enforcement moving to the police department, a restructure of the command staff that was on your consent calendar tonight, and information technology division moved to CityNet Services earlier this year with the vacancy of our assistant city manager position. So, high-level summary, and we will go over this, and I know there'll be questions. So, what's the good news? The good news is that we have Measure G, and the voters said yes to provide this city with additional revenue to support some of our challenges. And we had really planned for that $4 million, frankly, to largely go to roads. And pre-COVID-19, the plan was not to allocate Measure G funds through this budget process. The plan was always to establish the Measure G Oversight Committee that is advisory to the City Council and plan out a list of road projects and other important needs to the community. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has changed everything, and we are recommending delaying those expenditures due to the need to avoid cuts to public safety and our park programs, as well as park maintenance programs. And so it is $2 million of the 2.9. I believe that our fiscal condition warrants it, and it's before the budget, before you tonight in the proposed budget. We have significant deficit reduction strategies that have been identified. So we can adopt a balanced budget. It will be tough. There are no easy decisions. Again, our fiscal sustainability project has already been started, and we talked about the development pipeline. The bad news is too many of the funds are going in the wrong direction, and we have declining fund balances. And there are also many unfunded priorities. We have our deficit in our CityNet department, and we have our stormwater deficit again that is unable to meet the needs of that fund, nor the needs of the capital improvement projects for those funds. And we have challenges with our collective bargaining that is set to begin with our contracts that are expiring at the end of this calendar year. We have rising personnel costs, and we know we will have a sluggish economy. And so with that, I will be back up a little later to answer questions, but why don't I turn it over to Keith DeMartini, our Finance Director.
Mr. DeMartini.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Keith DeMartini, your Finance Director, and I want to focus my time with you this evening on providing another set of slides regarding the high-level summary of the city's fiscal condition leading up to the budget development process, as well as speaking mostly tonight before you in regards to our revenue sources and how the changes are being projected in the upcoming fiscal year, as well as a number of revenue enhancement strategies that have currently already been completed, or some of those that are in the works as of right now. So let me start with some additional slides to complement the city manager's slides into the city's fiscal condition. staff conducted an assessment to sort of evaluate where we are in the current fiscal year leading up to the proposed 2021 budget cycle. And as the city manager mentioned, in regards to the general fund, this box on the left-hand side, there is a significant deficit that represents about 15% of the annual operating budget. Staff has identified and has folded in the budget balancing strategies in the proposed budget so that you see a balanced budget. The economic impacts of COVID are substantial, and staff do anticipate that the impacts from COVID will be felt in the city's budget for years to come. Budget balancing strategies will likely be required, not just in the 2021 budget cycle, but likely in multiple years thereafter in order to achieve a balanced budget as well. And you will see that in our forecasting model that was presented in the city manager's letter as well. Staff will continue to evaluate fiscal sustainability efforts under the Comprehensive Fiscal Sustainability Project and various revenue enhancements as well. And it's important to note, as the city manager mentioned, that the ongoing revenue that the city will obtain from implementing development projects will help balance the budget in the years to come as well. City manager talked about our reserves. We will likely meet all of our reserve targets by the end of this current fiscal year. However, in the fiscal year 2021 budget, we will likely be falling short on most of the general fund reserves, primarily due to the transfer from the reserve into the general fund to meet the balanced budget. But it's important to note here that the most significant strain on the city's reserves has been and will continue to be the loan from the City Net Services Department due to the reduction of available cash that we have to meet those reserves. And the city manager talked a lot about Measure G already, so I'll just go on to the next slide. This slide summarizes the fiscal condition for the 4 enterprise funds. The water and the wastewater funds are healthy fiscally. They have adequate reserves on hand, primarily from the rate increases that the council approved a few years ago. And there are adequate balances that the city is currently investing in a very robust capital improvement program in both of those areas. The Stormwater Fund, however, has its challenges. The annual property tax assessment on property owners for most properties in San Bruno is about $46 a year. That falls short of funding not only the required operating expenses for the enterprise, but it's not enough to cover any capital improvements in the city's stormwater system. And so there is a need to identify additional funding to continue to meet our stormwater needs. And then also with the City Net Services Department, substantial improvement has occurred over the past year to achieve fiscal stability, but there continues to be this large negative fund balance with no dedicated funding identified currently for the much needed citywide fiber to the home project. And then the final fiscal conditions slide is in regards to our internal service departments and our equipment reserve in our CIP program. As the city manager mentioned, we are meeting our reserve targets for our internal service departments. However, there continues to be inadequate funding available for vehicles and equipment purchases due to the budget balancing strategy that the council agreed to take in the current fiscal year and that staff is proposing to continue to take in the 2021 budget cycle, which is to not fund our equipment reserve at all within this current year and into the following fiscal year. So the net effect of that is our equipment reserve continues to not have adequate resources to cover eventual equipment and vehicle replacements. Our self-insurance fund, the city manager spoke about that as well. As far as our capital improvement program, again, we are moving forward on our robust water and wastewater programs, primarily due to leveraging the debt that the city issued back in 2017 to expedite many of those projects. But there continues to be many unfunded or underfunded priority projects that staff will detail in the upcoming study sessions with you in the next few weeks. So with that, I want to spend some time focusing on the general fund and particularly on the revenues. I want to first focus and explain how we present our 5-year financial forecast. And it's just really important that we continue to do this. Last year was the first year that the city implemented a long-range financial forecast for all of its major funds. It's a government best practice. It helps facilitate long-range planning for all of our funds. And this year we focused on refining our methodology and really making sure that we understand the impacts from COVID, not just in the 2021 budget cycle, but the effects thereafter. So this graph here shows you in the blue columns what the projected ending fund balance is projected to be in the general fund for the upcoming 5-year financial forecast planning cycle. And the dotted black line shows you the projected expenditures, and the green line shows you the revenues. The major takeaways here on this slide is that, as you can see, the expenditures in the 3 years following the 2021 budget cycle are projected to be more than the revenues that are projected to come in. And that indicates the need for continuing to identify budget balancing strategies to balance the budget thereafter. This does assume a very conservative assumption of revenue that we would achieve from development projects coming online, as well as the additional expenditure increases from personnel costs related to pension and healthcare and other fringe benefits as well. Overall general funds summary. In the Q3 financial update report that staff delivered to you at the last City Council meeting, we articulated that we project the ending fund balance in the current fiscal year 1920, to be about $1.5 million. Again, that meets the reserve target in the city's reserve policy. But unfortunately, next year's proposed budget in 2021, including all of the budget balancing strategies that the city manager had just presented, still results in a modest deficit of just over $500,000, which will then result in an ending fund balance by the end of next fiscal year of about $1 million, which is about $500,000 less than the reserve target calls for in our reserve policy. And so we'll step through the revenues and expenditures that make up these numbers in the coming slides here. These pie charts should be familiar. We present these at every quarterly financial update. Again, most of our revenues do come from taxes, which I'll walk through each one in a little bit of detail in the next few slides. And a majority of our general fund sources go to pay for the public safety function, primarily police and fire, at more than half of the general fund expenditures. So moving on to our revenue sources that make up the $48.8 million in 2021. Most of our revenue in the general fund does come from taxes, and I'll walk through each of those individually on the next slide. The major takeaway on this slide, though, is, as you can see, a majority of these revenue sources will show a fairly substantial decline year over year. Taxes is projected to go down about 11%. Our use of money and property for interest income and our rental income on city facilities is down 14%. Departmental revenues, as the city manager talked about earlier, overall is going to be down about 28%. You will see the allocation and other revenues line has a substantial increase, and that is where we record the transfer in to the general fund from the various other funds, like Measure G or like gas tax. That's where we show the infusion of cash coming into the general fund to help us balance the budget at the end of the day. Overall, general fund revenues are projected to be down about 8% after all of those budget balancing strategies have been implemented. So just peeling the onion one level down, these are the major tax revenue sources for the city's general fund. Starting with property tax will be about flat year over year. Sales tax, as mentioned earlier, down 18%. Transient occupancy tax, so on and so forth. As you can see, our major tax revenue sources will experience substantial decline, what is being projected into next fiscal year. Talking about property tax for a moment, this graphic shows what portion of every dollar remitted to the county for a resident's property tax bill, what portion of that dollar actually comes back to the city of San Bruno for our general fund operations. And on the bottom, highlighted in red, shows you that only 15 cents for every dollar that gets remitted comes back to the city. A majority of property tax dollars goes to fund public education systems in and throughout the state and the county. This graph here was a slide that staff presented to you during a presentation we made in regards to the impacts related to COVID. And what it showed was that during the last two recessions that were experienced over the last 15 or 20 years, the first one being the 9/11 recession, and the second one being the Great Recession, San Bruno's assessed values for property did show a decline. The 9/11 recession lasted about a year, and the recession following the Great Recession lasted a couple years. And so time will tell, and the data will tell how significant the COVID-19 shelter-in-place economic impacts is going to have on San Bruno's assessed values, which directly impacts the amount of property tax revenue that we get. Moving on to sales tax, this graphic shows an example of someone purchasing something for $75 in San Bruno. They'll pay $7.31 of sales tax, and of that amount, about 15% of that paid comes back to the city of San Bruno. And that amount does include the half-cent sales tax related to Measure G, the district sales tax. This pie chart shows the different types of industries that generate sales tax revenue for the city of San Bruno. And the major takeaway on this slide really is that restaurants and hotels, autos and transportation, and sort of the biggest pieces of the pie here were significantly impacted from the shelter in place. And so again, time will tell how those businesses ramp back up once those orders are fully lifted and we can generate some more normal sales tax activity in the years to come. This table here shows the percent decline in those major sales tax generating industries year over year, pretty much. And the middle column shows that a majority of these industries are projected to experience a substantial decline in their economic activity year over year. Autos and transportation will be cut in half. Building and construction activities cut close to half. You'll see that there are some industries that are projected to actually grow during this time, primarily the state and county pools, and that's primarily from online sales, from online platforms like Walmart.com or Amazon. Those areas are expected to actually increase through the pandemic. So moving on to our transient occupancy tax. There are 12 hotel operators in San Bruno, a little over 600 rooms in total. And currently, the adopted TOT rate for the hotel operators is about 12%, is what people pay to stay at a hotel. As the city manager indicated, staff are projecting a significant decline in occupancy, which directly means less TOT revenue for the city, and we're projecting about a 40% decline. Many industry experts had projected around 75 to 90% occupancy decline in the current quarter that we're in right now, with very, very slow projected recovery through the entire fiscal year of 2021. And again, that's primarily due to significant business travel reductions that will have long-lasting implications on that revenue stream. It's important to note that the TOT rate in San Bruno at 12% is lower than some of the other neighboring cities in San Mateo County as well. Our next major general fund tax revenue source is our business license tax. And this revenue is mostly collected at the very, very beginning of the fiscal year with the annual recertification process. There is likely a temporary reduction with some of the business license activity due to some businesses being closed and having lower gross receipts. There is an assumption of some businesses actually having additional activity, like grocery stores or some other retailers that experienced some increased activity during shelter in place. But overall, this revenue source for the city is projected to decline about 31% year over year, and that's primarily attributable to the closure of Sky Park, the airport parking facility off of San Mateo Avenue. So now that I've gone through the major general fund revenue sources, I did want to take some time and articulate many of the revenue enhancement strategies that staff have currently implemented under the direction of the City Council, and then also articulate those efforts that are underway, because there is quite a lot of work currently being done. First, I'll talk about the citywide development impact fee program, which went into effect about a year ago on May 1st, 2019. Again, a development impact fee is a one-time fee that a developer will pay, and that represents their proportional share of what it will take to enhance infrastructure improvements to serve the growth from the development. This will be a vital funding source for the city in years to come to help implement capital improvements. To date, we collected about $110,000 so far, but the city will see significant increases in this revenue source in the coming years when much larger development projects are implemented. Next is the Measure G district sales tax that the voters approved last November. And the city manager spoke about this already, but this will prove to be a vital funding source for city enhancements for many years to come. This table here summarizes in the proposed budget how staff are recommending to City Council how to use the Measure G funds. Just to summarize here, first, about $2 million is projected to be transferred to the general fund to avoid any future cuts to police, fire, and park maintenance operations. Next, there's a request to have $150,000 fund the street sign replacement program. The next one is $44,000 to help fund the parks manager enhancement request. And then the one after that, about $205,000, staff are proposing to use Measure G funds to replace the HVAC and repair the roof at the police headquarters building. And then finally, $200,000 is proposed to be used for the street light pole replacement program. And after all of those items, if they were to be approved, it would still leave an ending fund balance in the Measure G fund of over $400,000 to be used for future efforts. So moving on to the master fee schedule. The master fee schedule is typically presented to the City Council annually during the budget process. At this time, staff are not recommending any changes, and that's primarily because staff is currently working to complete the fee study project that had been underway for quite some time, where staff is comprehensively reviewing the over 700 individual city fees to ensure that they achieve adequate cost recovery. And I've highlighted a couple fees and departments particularly here, where a lot of work is being done to rebaseline those fees. Just in an overview, the city's fee study project will include many of the bullets here listed. I won't go over all these in detail, but effectively, staff is taking a comprehensive review of all the fees, making sure that they're set at the right level, achieving full cost recovery for the services that the city provides for these types of services, that it's a legally defensible process, that we are able to update and maintain these fees at least on an annual basis, and that we can make sure that they stay on pace with inflation that occurs annually. This is a slide here that summarizes the scope of the fee study project. This was a presentation that staff delivered to council back in January. For the over 700 fees, what the current cost recovery is for all of the fees in these departments listed here. And as you can see, for the building division and for the planning division, the current cost recovery on those fees is far below what is the industry standard. So for building, they're only recovering 28% of what it actually costs for staff to review a building permit. And after a city conducts their fee study, typically post-fee study, their fees would be set anywhere between 90 to 100%. So it's critical that we proceed and see this project through implementation so that our fees do, in fact, obtain full cost recovery. And then finally, there was a presentation earlier this evening that our consultants presented in regards to the Community Priority Survey, so I won't go into detail here, but it was clear that most residents were satisfied with the job that the city was doing to address the impacts from COVID and the services that were being offered. And the largest problem that they told us facing the city was the coronavirus response and the recovery needs, which is playing itself out in how the budget is being presented for 2021. And they identified, the respondents identified major areas where they would like to see continued enhancements in street repair, supporting families and in financial transition, services to local businesses, and maintaining neighborhood police patrols for safety. Again, there's work that staff will do based on City Council's feedback to consider a potential TOT rate increase from 12% up to 14%. There are a number of cities in San Mateo County that currently have a TOT rate greater than 12%, and there are many in Santa Clara County that have rates greater than 12% as well. It is projected pre-COVID that a rate increase from 12% to about 14% would generate approximately $500,000 annually. But sort of post-COVID, that amount would actually be projected down temporarily until the TOT revenue source rebounds. And then finally, the other major potential revenue enhancement that staff could research under City Council's guidance would be to revisit the stormwater special assessment. As we talked about earlier, the special assessment is far from adequate from not only maintaining the operating expense budget, but any capital improvements. And so it would be important to identify an augmentation to the existing funding source to make sure that that enterprise fund is fiscally sound. And with that, I will turn it back over to the city manager to wrap up before we take your questions this evening.
All right. So the night is young, so I will not say much more other than reviewing the deficit of 8.2 million, and we're here for questions, and I will leave this slide up for our conversation.
Okay, thank you. I think at this time with council, I'm going to ask for if there's any public comment or questions. I didn't see any, but I'll just double check. Seeing none, unless I'm corrected, we'll bring it back to council. Questions of council? Well, again, we are meeting tomorrow from 10 to 5, and I know that we'll get more into, if I want to say it, into the minutia of things. And this was a broad stroke and brush of everything that's occurring. So to my colleagues, questions? I'm seeing none.
Mr. Mayor?
Marty?
Being that we're going to meet all day on this tomorrow and it's 10:47, I did send in some questions earlier today. I think this is very serious news, and that I'm okay with moving forward with the questions for tomorrow.
Okay.
Otherwise, we could be here for a long time. So that's what I'm thinking is probably best of use of our time, unless any of my colleagues want to ask a question.
Yeah, they're welcome to ask questions.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, I was hoping that we go to each of us, and Marty, I appreciate what you just said, and I'm not going to go back and forth. We're going to do it once, say what you need to say, and then we'll move on, because like you said, we're 10 to 5 tomorrow. Laura.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to compliment Jovan and Keith for just a really, I mean, I know you guys have been buried in this for probably several months, but the presentations are excellent, and the information you provided, and it really does help you you paint a picture, although not a good picture, but we're making strides and we're moving in the right direction. And I too will save for my comments and questions for tomorrow.
Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I have some very serious reservations around the use of the Measure G funds. I know we're going to have a full conversation tomorrow, but I just want to reiterate what I said at the last meeting because there's been no change since then, which is that we do have enough people to be interviewed. Those interviews were canceled by, it is unknown why they were canceled, and it's unclear why we haven't moved forward with an oversight committee, and I feel uncomfortable spending a cent of that Measure G money without having that oversight committee in place. So with that, I will leave any further comments till tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, Michael. Michael, anything for you? You're muted.
I was muted. I
No
just wanted
worries.
to echo what Laura said. Compliments to staff for a really well put together presentation. It's clear that a lot of time and effort went into this, and all of the the reductions and the methods that are going into this. It's I know it's been a lot of work, and while it's not great news, at least there is a path forward, so definitely appreciate the work that went into it, and I'll reserve any further comments till tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have several questions. I'm kidding, guys. I also had some questions, but that I have asked and that can wait until tomorrow as well. It's a lot of information, but certainly we'll keep it fresh for tomorrow when we get more into each department, which I believe this is now the second time that we will have done a all day to really focus and get into all elements of the budget, and this will be a challenging one. So with that, City Manager or Finance Director, is there anything else on this topic?
No, thank you. Look forward to being with you again at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay. And then if you could remove the presentation. Thank you.